The shepherd dog stood motionless beside the mahogany coffin, eyes fixed on the still face beneath the glass. Cardinals shifted in their seats. Cameras clicked. But the dog didn't move, didn't whimper, just waited as if he knew something no one else did. What secret lay between this humble creature and the most powerful man in the Catholic world? Before we continue, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The dog's name was Santo. He wasn't bred in palaces or trained by experts. He was a street dog, tan and white, with one ear that flopped forward and scars along his ribs that told stories of survival. He'd been found 3 years earlier in a Roman alley, shivering beside a dumpster, ribs showing through matted fur. Pope Francis had been returning from an unscheduled visit to a homeless shelter when his driver spotted the creature. The Pope, then 84, had asked the car to stop. His guards protested. Protocol demanded otherwise. But Francis had learned long ago that protocol often stood between people and mercy. He'd knelt on the wet pavement, his white cassock dragging through puddles, and extended one weathered hand. The dog had trembled, uncertain. Francis had waited, patient as stone, until finally the creature crept forward and pressed his muzzle into the Pope's palm. "Broken things recognize each other," Francis had whispered. Santo came to live in a small courtyard behind the Pope's modest apartment in the Vatican guest house. Not in luxury, just a warm corner with blankets and bowls of simple food. The Pope visited him every morning before prayers, sometimes sitting on the stone bench for half an hour, speaking softly in Spanish while Santo rested his head on the papal knee. The Vatican staff found it odd at first. Popes didn't keep pets, not like this. They had history, tradition, appearances to maintain. But Francis had never cared much for appearances. He wore the same old shoes until they fell apart. He carried his own briefcase. He called his sister on Tuesdays. And he loved a scarred street dog, as if the creature held answers to questions Francis had been asking God for decades. The Pope's health had been failing for months. He was 87 now, his body betraying him in small, cruel ways. His lungs struggled. His heart stuttered. The doctors spoke in careful phrases about managing comfort and preparing for transitions. Francis faced death the way he'd faced everything else, with clear eyes and little drama. He'd written letters to world leaders, recorded final messages, made arrangements for his funeral. He requested simplicity. No gold, no excess, just truth. But in his private moments, in the early morning hours when pain kept him awake, he'd call for Santo. The dog would be brought to his bedside, would curl up on the floor nearby, and Francis would reach down to rest his fingers in that familiar fur. "You've been a good friend," he'd say. "Better than most humans." Santo would lift his head, dark eyes reflecting lamplight, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or just the quiet comfort of not being alone. The Vatican nurses noticed that the Pope's breathing steadied when the dog was present. His blood pressure dropped. The lines in his face softened. One nurse, Sister Maria, began bringing Santo without being asked. "They need each other," she told a skeptical cardinal. "Some bonds don't require explanation." On a Thursday in late autumn, as rain drummed against the Vatican windows, Pope Francis called his closest advisors to his bedside. He could barely speak above a whisper. They leaned close, these powerful men in crimson robes, straining to hear. "When I'm gone," Francis said, "let the dog stay with me. Until the funeral, he'll understand when it's time." Cardinal Benedetti frowned. "Your Holiness, that's highly irregular. There are protocols." Francis managed a weak smile. "I've spent my life being irregular. Don't make me stop now." They agreed, though many thought it was the morphine talking. Surely he didn't mean it literally. 2 days later, as dawn broke over Rome, Pope Francis drew his last breath. Sister Maria was holding his hand. Santo lay curled on a cushion 3 feet away, head raised, watching. The moment Francis died, Santo stood. He walked to the bedside, placed his front paws on the mattress, and pressed his nose to the Pope's cooling hand. He stayed that way for long minutes, while Sister Maria wept quietly. "He knows," she whispered. "Dear God, he knows." The Vatican machinery ground into motion. Statements were prepared. World leaders notified. The faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square, their grief rising like incense. But inside the Apostolic Palace, a strange battle was brewing. Cardinal Benedetti stood in the Pope's apartment, staring at Santo, who hadn't left the room since Francis died. "The dog cannot attend the funeral," Benedetti said firmly. "It's absurd. We have 2 billion Catholics watching. Heads of state, the College of Cardinals. We cannot have a dog wandering around." Sister Maria crossed her arms. His Holiness asked specifically. I heard him. We all did. He wasn't in his right mind. The pain medications, his mind was perfectly clear, Sister Maria interrupted. And his heart was clearer still. That dog stays. The argument escalated. Factions formed. Some supported the dog's presence as a final act of Francis's famous humility and love for all creatures. Others saw it as an embarrassment, a circus that would distract from the solemnity of the occasion. Meanwhile, Santo lay by the door to the Pope's bedroom, nose pointed toward where his friend's body had been taken. He hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk water, just waited with the patience of a creature who'd learned long ago that waiting was sometimes all you could do. After hours of debate, a compromise emerged. Santo could be present, but only at a distance. He would be kept in a side chapel during the funeral, away from cameras, away from dignitaries. A symbolic gesture, nothing more. Sister Maria reluctantly agreed, though her heart ached. She'd tried to feed Santo, to coax him to drink. He'd refused everything. His eyes had taken on a hollow quality that frightened her. "He's mourning," she told another nurse. "Animals grieve too, sometimes deeper than we do." The day before the funeral, as workers transformed St. Peter's Basilica into a cathedral of farewell, Santo was moved to the chapel of the Blessed Sacrament. It was quiet there, dim, far from the chaos of preparation. A Swiss guard was posted nearby, though what threat a grieving dog posed, no one could explain. Santo lay on the marble floor, his breathing shallow. He faced the direction of the main basilica, where Francis's body rested in state. Through walls and corridors, past centuries of stone and prayer, the dog somehow knew exactly where his friend lay. Sister Maria visited late that night. She sat beside Santo, ran her hand along his rough fur. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," she said softly, "but he loved you. Never doubt that." Santo's tail moved once, the smallest acknowledgement. Then he closed his eyes, and Sister Maria could have sworn she heard him sigh. Dawn broke cold and clear. Rome held its breath. Millions lined the streets. St. Peter's Square filled with mourners, their candles flickering like stars brought to earth. Inside the basilica, the air hung heavy with incense and sorrow. Pope Francis lay in his simple wooden coffin, placed before the main altar. His face, visible through a glass panel, looked peaceful. He wore plain vestments, as requested. No gold mitre, no ornate staff, just a simple cross on his chest and a rosary woven through his fingers. The funeral mass began. Cardinals processed in, a river of red. Bishops, priests, world leaders took their seats. The choir's voices rose like prayers given wings. Everything proceeded with ancient precision, every gesture carrying centuries of meaning. In the side chapel, Santo lifted his head. Something had changed. some signal only he could read. He stood, shakily at first, then with growing purpose. The Swiss guard glanced over, uncertain. Santo walked to the chapel entrance, nose testing the air. "Easy, boy," the guard whispered. "You need to stay here." But Santo had spent 3 years learning when to obey and when to follow a deeper law. He looked at the guard, not with defiance, but with a kind of gentle insistence, then stepped past him into the corridor. The guard reached for him, hesitated. Something in the dog's bearing stopped him. This wasn't a creature running wild. This was a creature called. Santo walked through the Vatican corridors with steady purpose, past frescoes that had witnessed centuries, past crypts holding saints and sinners, past guards who stepped aside, moved by something they couldn't name. He reached the edge of the Basilica just as the Kyrie eleison began. Santo paused at the Basilica's threshold. Before him stretched an ocean of people, of ritual, of grief formalized into liturgy. Somewhere in that vastness lay his friend. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Heads turned, cameras swiveled. The dog had appeared like a ghost, materializing from shadows into the carefully choreographed solemnity. Cardinal Benedetti, seated near the altar, stiffened. This was exactly what he'd feared. A disruption, a spectacle. He gestured sharply to nearby guards, but before they could move, Santo began to walk. He didn't run, didn't rush. He walked down the central aisle with the quiet dignity of a pilgrim who knew his destination. His nails clicked against marble. His breath came in soft pants. Every eye followed him. An elderly woman in black crossed herself. A child pointed, whispering to her mother. A cardinal's lips moved in what might have been prayer or protest. Santo walked past presidents and kings, past the College of Cardinals in their crimson robes, past Sister Maria, who pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming. He walked as if the thousands of watching eyes didn't exist, as if only one thing in all creation mattered. The choir faltered, their ancient phrases trailing into silence. The celebrant, Cardinal Santos from Portugal, froze mid-gesture. In 1,000 years of Vatican funerals, nothing like this had ever occurred. Santo reached the coffin. The dog stopped 3 feet from where Pope Francis lay. His body trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or the overwhelming weight of absence. For a long moment, Santo simply stood there. The Basilica held its breath. 2,000 years of tradition met a street dog's simple love, and no one knew what came next. Then Santo sat. Not dramatically, not with any sense of performance. He simply sat, the way he'd sat 1,000 times in the Vatican courtyard, while Francis talked about mercy and hope and the ways humans forget that all creatures are sacred. He sat, and he waited. Cardinal Benedetti moved to intervene, but Cardinal Santos raised one hand. "Wait," he said softly. "Just wait." The silence deepened. Outside, mourners in the square fell quiet as word spread. A dog, a simple dog, sitting vigil beside the Pope. Santo's eyes never left Francis's face, that weathered face behind glass, still now, empty of the spark that had recognized a broken dog in a Roman alley and had seen not trash, but treasure. Minutes passed. The dog didn't move. Some in the congregation began to weep, touched by something they couldn't articulate. The pure simplicity of it. The reminder that love doesn't require words or doctrine, just presence. A young priest leaned toward his companion. "Do you think he understands?" The older priest, who'd served Francis for years, nodded. "I think he understands better than most of us." Sister Maria stood slowly from her seat. She walked forward, her footsteps echoing. She approached Santo, knelt beside him, placed one hand on his head. "It's all right," she whispered. "He knows you came." Santo's tail moved once, twice, But he didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on Francis, as if by looking hard enough, by believing hard enough, he might see his friend breathe again. The funeral mass resumed, awkwardly at first, then with growing acceptance. Cardinal Santos decided to incorporate the moment rather than fight it. He spoke of Francis's love for all creation, his insistence that God's mercy extended beyond human understanding. "Our Holy Father," Cardinal Santos said, his voice carrying through the Basilica, "taught us that holiness often appears in unexpected forms, in the poor, in the forgotten, in the creatures we overlook." He gestured toward Santo, who remained motionless beside the coffin. "This faithful friend reminds us that love requires no theology, only presence, only devotion, only the courage to stay when everything else falls away." The congregation murmured agreement. Some smiled through tears, others nodded, remembering their own pets, their own experiences of animal devotion that had taught them things about love they'd never learned in church. But Santo knew none of this. He existed in a bubble of grief and waiting. His body began to sway slightly, exhausted from days without food or water. Sister Maria, still kneeling nearby, tried once more to offer him water from a small flask. He sniffed it, looked at her with eyes that carried ancient sadness, and turned back to the coffin. As the Mass progressed through readings and prayers, through hymns and homilies, Santo remained, a living statue, a testament to something the modern world often forgot, that faithfulness still existed, simple and pure, and wholly unconcerned with being witnessed. The cameras captured it all. Images flashed around the world. Social media exploded. But inside the Basilica, time moved differently. Seconds stretched into eternities. Prayers floated like breath. And still, Santo waited, as if his waiting itself was a form of prayer, more honest than any human words. As Cardinal Santos began the final commendation, as the moment approached when Francis's coffin would be sealed and carried to the crypt, Santo suddenly stood. Those nearest flinched, expecting disruption. But the dog didn't bark or howl. Instead, he walked around the coffin, slowly, deliberately, his nose nearly touching the wood. He circled once, twice, 3 times. The ancient ritual of animals since the beginning of time, the marking of territory, the blessing of boundaries, the acknowledgement of passage. Then he stopped at the head of the coffin, where Francis's face lay visible behind glass. Santo raised himself onto his hind legs, front paws resting gently on the coffin's edge. He stretched forward, nose pressing against the glass, and stayed there. His breath fogged the panel. His body trembled with effort and exhaustion. Sister Maria moved to help him down, concerned he might collapse. But before she reached him, something extraordinary happened. Santo's mouth opened, not in a bark or whine. He began to make a sound no one in that basilica had ever heard a dog make before. It started low, almost subsonic, a rumbling that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Then it climbed, transformed, became something between a howl and a song. Not aggressive, not painful, something else entirely. It was a sound of pure lament, of grief given voice, of a heart breaking in the only language it knew. The basilica froze. Hardened Vatican officials felt tears rise unbidden. World leaders who'd negotiated wars found their throats tightening. The sound pierced through every defense, every wall, every careful separation between human and animal. This wasn't a dog mourning. This was a soul crying out to another soul, begging for acknowledgement, for one more moment, for the impossible grace of return. The sound rose and rose, filling the great basilica, echoing off frescoed ceilings, reverberating through chapels where saints' bones lay in golden boxes. It was raw and terrible and beautiful, the purest expression of love's agony when faced with death's finality. And then, as the sound reached its peak, as Santo's body went rigid with the effort, something happened that no one could explain. The glass panel over Francis's face fogged over completely. Condensation, perhaps, from Santo's breath, but it spread too quickly, too evenly. The fog swirled, as if moved by invisible currents. And in that fog, for just a moment, for a heartbeat that every witness would spend the rest of their lives trying to convince themselves they hadn't imagined, something moved, a shape in the mist, not clear, not obvious, but there. The suggestion of a hand, rising, reaching toward where Santo stood. The dog went utterly still. The fog cleared as suddenly as it had appeared. Santo dropped to all four paws, staggered backward, and collapsed onto the marble floor. Sister Maria rushed forward, gathering Santo into her arms. His breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed. She felt for a pulse, found it weak but steady. "He needs help," she called out. "Please, someone." But as she held him, she felt something else. The dog's body, which had been rigid with grief for days, had suddenly relaxed. His head lolled against her arm. And on his face, if a dog could be said to have expressions that matched human emotions, was something that looked like peace. Cardinal Santos approached slowly. He knelt beside Sister Maria, looked at Santo, then at the coffin. His face had gone pale. "Did you see?" he began. "I saw," Sister Maria whispered. Others had seen too, or thought they had, or wanted to believe they had. The witnesses would argue for years about what had actually occurred. Some claimed the glass had simply fogged from Santo's breath. Others insisted they'd seen Francis's hand move. Still others spoke of lights, of warmth, of the undeniable sense that something sacred had passed between the living and the dead. But in that moment, as Sister Maria held the exhausted dog and Cardinal Santos knelt beside them, the explanation didn't matter. What mattered was that Santo had received his answer. Whatever had passed between him and Francis in that final exchange, it had been enough. The dog's vigil was complete. A Vatican doctor pushed through the crowd, began examining Santo. "He's severely dehydrated," the doctor said. "Probably hasn't eaten in days, but he's stable. We need to get him fluids." Sister Maria wouldn't let them take him. "I'll carry him myself," she said, voice firm. And she did, gathering the dog into her arms like a child, walking back down that long aisle while the congregation watched in silence. As she passed, people reached out, not quite touching, but extending hands in blessing. The gesture one makes toward something holy. At the Basilica entrance, Sister Maria paused, turned back. The funeral was resuming, moving toward its conclusion. Francis's coffin would be sealed soon, carried to its final rest in the crypt below. But something had changed. The grief in the Basilica felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Santo's vigil had cracked open a door, let in air, reminded everyone that death, while final, wasn't cruel, that love found ways to say goodbye, that even in ending, there were mercies. Santo recovered slowly. Sister Maria kept him in her small apartment in the Vatican guest house, nursing him with water, broth, gentle words. He slept for 2 days straight, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. When he woke, he was different. The hollow desperation had left his eyes. He ate a little, drank more readily. He allowed himself to be comforted. On the 3rd day, Sister Maria carried him back to the courtyard where he'd lived with Francis. She'd worried he might grieve anew, seeing the space without his friend. But instead, Santo walked to his favorite corner, the spot where he'd sat with the Pope 1,000 mornings, and lay down with something that looked like contentment. "You said goodbye," Sister Maria said softly. didn't you?" Santo's tail thumped once against the stone. The world, meanwhile, couldn't stop talking about what had happened. The footage of Santo's vigil had been watched billions of times. Theologians debated its meaning. Scientists offered explanations. Artists painted interpretations. But for those who'd been present, for the 2,000 witnesses in St. Peter's Basilica that day, no explanation was needed. They'd felt something, seen something, been changed by something. A simple dog had reminded the world that love transcends understanding, that devotion requires no doctrine, that grief, when faced with courage, can become something like grace. 6 months later, on a spring morning when Rome was painting itself in flowers, Sister Maria took Santo for a walk through the Vatican gardens. He was healthier now, had regained weight and energy, but he moved differently, more slowly, more deliberately, as if he carried some quiet knowledge the rest of creation didn't possess. They passed the spot where Francis had first found him, that rainy night 3 years ago. Santo paused, sniffed the air, then looked up at Sister Maria with something in his eyes that might have been memory or gratitude, or both. "He loved you so much," Sister Maria said. "I hope you know that." Santo leaned against her leg, and she felt the warmth of him, the simple animal comfort that Francis had cherished. The new pope, a practical man from Argentina, who'd known Francis well, had made an unusual decree. Santo would live out his days in the Vatican, cared for by the community, and when his time came, he would be buried in the pet cemetery behind the gardens, with a simple marker that read, "Santo, faithful friend of a holy man." Some called it sacrilege, others called it fitting, but most simply called it right. Because Santo had done something no homily could accomplish. He'd shown the world that holiness doesn't require grandeur, that the sacred can wear fur and live in simple corners, that sometimes the deepest truths are carried by creatures who never learned to speak, but who know, bone deep, how to love without condition. As Sister Maria and Santo walked back toward the guest house, past priests and pilgrims and tourists with cameras, a small girl broke from her mother's hand and ran toward them. "Is that him?" she asked, eyes wide. "The dog who said goodbye to the Pope." Sister Maria nodded. "Would you like to pet him?" The girl knelt, ran her small hand over Santo's head. He leaned into her touch, patient as always. "I lost my grandpa," the girl whispered to the dog. "Did it hurt when you lost your friend?" Santo looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes. He licked her hand once, gentle as a blessing. The girl smiled through tears. "Thank you," she said. Then to Sister Maria, "He understands, doesn't he?" "Yes," Sister Maria said softly. "I think he understands, better than most." That night, alone in her apartment with Santo curled at the foot of her bed, Sister Maria opened the letter Francis had left for her. She'd waited months to read it, not ready before. But now, with Santo breathing softly nearby, she felt strong enough. The Pope's handwriting was shaky but clear. "Dearest Maria, if you're reading this, then Santo has completed his vigil, and you've witnessed something I knew would happen. That dog taught me more about God than 50 years of theology. He showed me that love doesn't end, it transforms. When my time comes, he'll know. And he'll do what love does. It'll show up. It'll stay. It'll refuse to accept that goodbye is the final word. Let him. The world needs to see that kind of faithfulness. It's become too rare. And when it's over, when he's said what he needs to say, take care of him. He's been my teacher. Let him teach others. All creatures are sacred, Maria, every single one. Santo helped me remember that. Let him help the world remember too." Sister Maria folded the letter carefully, pressed it to her heart. She looked at Santo, sleeping peacefully now, his paws twitching with dreams. "You did it," she whispered. "You showed them." And perhaps he had. Perhaps a scarred street dog had reminded a grieving world that love persists, that faithfulness matters, that the bonds between souls transcend every boundary humans try to build. In the years that followed, Santo became a living legend. People made pilgrimages to see him. Children sent letters. Artists painted his portrait. But he remained unchanged, a simple dog who lived in a simple corner, content with walks and sunlight and the memory of a friend who'd seen his worth when the world had not. When Santo's own time came, 5 years later, on a quiet autumn evening, he passed peacefully in his sleep. Sister Maria found him in the morning, curled in his favorite spot in the courtyard, his face calm. They buried him as Francis had wished, with a simple ceremony. But thousands came, cardinals and street sweepers, children and world leaders. They came to honor a creature who'd taught them something essential and nearly lost. That love, when pure enough, when true enough, when brave enough to stand before death without flinching, becomes eternal. And sometimes, just sometimes, it finds a way to reach across the boundary between this world and whatever lies beyond, to say, "I see you. I remember you. I carry you still." Santo's story spread across continents, across generations. It became the story people told when they needed to believe that devotion still existed, that simplicity still held power, that even in an age of noise and distraction, quiet faithfulness could shake the foundations of the world. A street dog and a pope, an unlikely friendship, an unforgettable goodbye, and a reminder that sometimes the most profound truths arrive on 4 paws, asking nothing, offering everything, teaching us that the measure of a soul has nothing to do with the body that contains it. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and share it with someone you want to hear with. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story.